First contact fallout. The first sign of the Vraxian hierarchy appeared on the long-range sensors of the UEF Stoneheart as nothing more than an anomalous energy reading near the Kuiper belt. Captain Alina Markov stood on the command deck, her weathered face illuminated by the holographic displays that transformed the anomaly into recognizable shapes. 23 vessels, each larger than anything humanity had constructed, moved with unsettling precision toward the inner planets. "Are we recording this?" Markov asked, her voice steady despite the tension filling the bridge. "Every byte, Captain," confirmed Lieutenant Wei from the sensor station. "Earth Defense Command is receiving the feed in real time." The UEF Stoneheart was humanity's latest achievement, a Ravager-class heavy destroyer bristling with railguns, missile pods, and experimental plasma lances. Its asymmetrical hull bore the scars of the Jupiter blockade, patches of newer armor plating visible against the older sections. Not pretty, but functional. Humans had never prioritized aesthetics in warship design. Survival always trumped appearance. "They're accelerating," reported Tactical Officer Kozlov, his fingers dancing across the control interface. "Approaching Neptune's orbit at..." "That can't be right." He recalibrated his instruments. "Captain, they're moving at 0.25 key and decelerating rapidly. No visible engine flare." Markov leaned forward, studying the tactical display. The aliens had covered in hours what would take human ships weeks. Any electromagnetic emissions? Heat signatures? "Nothing, Captain. They're cold as vacuum until..." Kozlov's console erupted with alerts. Massive energy spike. "They're broadcasting something across all frequencies." The main view screen flickered, then stabilized to reveal an alien being. Its iridescent exoskeleton enclosed a body structure unlike anything terrestrial evolution had produced. Multiple limbs moved with fluid grace as compound eyes studied the camera. When it spoke, the ship's translation matrix struggled before producing stilted English. "Attention primitive vessels. You have been graced by the arrival of the Vraxian hierarchy. I am Sovereign Commander Tazvor, executor of assimilation protocols. Your species has been evaluated and deemed suitable for incorporation as a client civilization. Resistance is contraindicated and historically unsuccessful." Markov maintained her composure, though her hand instinctively touched the service pistol at her hip, a relic from her days in the Mars Special Forces. "This is Captain Alina Markov of the United Earth Federation vessel Stoneheart. We represent an independent sovereign species. We welcome peaceful contact, but will not submit to incorporation without consultation with our government." The alien's exoskeleton shifted in what might have been amusement. "Your comprehension is irrelevant. We have studied your transmissions and technological development. You possess nuclear fission, preliminary fusion capabilities, and rudimentary spaceflight limited to your home system. Your military vessels display inefficient design principles and outdated weaponry." The view screen expanded to show the alien fleet in formation. Their ships resembled perfect geometric forms carved from some impossible metallic material that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. They made the Stoneheart and its escort vessels look like industrial refuse by comparison. "The hierarchy has incorporated 22 species into our collective. None have persisted in resistance after demonstration of our capabilities. Your planet will be restructured for optimal resource utilization. Your population will be categorized by aptitude and assigned appropriate functions." Sovereign Commander Tazvor's voice became almost sympathetic. "This process has been refined over 15,000 cycles. Disruption will be minimal if cooperation is immediate." In the tense silence that followed, Markov studied the alien vessels more carefully. Despite their intimidating appearance, something struck her as odd. Where were their point defense systems? The armor plating? The redundant external sensors? Even the most basic UEF corvette had backup systems for critical functions and armor thick enough to survive micrometeor impacts. These alien ships looked like precision instruments rather than war machines. "Sovereign Commander," she responded, choosing her words carefully. "Our government will need time to consider your proposal. This is our first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. Surely you understand the significance of this moment for our species." The alien commander made a gesture that the translation matrix couldn't interpret. "Your species has been monitored since you developed radio technology. There is nothing to consider. You will receive incorporation protocols within your planetary hour. Implementation will commence in 48 of your hours." The crystalline face leaned closer to whatever served as their camera. "Be advised. Resistance has occurred in 13.4% of first contacts. In each case, the resisting species required pacification protocols before incorporation of survivors." The transmission terminated abruptly. On the tactical display, the alien armada had arranged itself in a perfect defensive sphere, maintaining position near Neptune. "UEF Earth Defense Command," Markov ordered, her mind racing through combat scenarios and finding none that ended well for humanity. "And bring the ship to combat readiness. I want every sensor focused on those vessels. Record everything. Energy signatures, communication patterns, hull compositions. If they sneeze, I want to know about it." As her crew rushed to comply, Markov studied the alien ships once more. Despite their technological superiority, something about their design philosophy nagged at her. These weren't vessels built to take punishment. They were built by a species that had never expected to receive any. "Lieutenant Wei," she said quietly, "send everything we have to Dr. Chandrasekhar in engineering. Tell him to look for weaknesses in their design, particularly structural vulnerabilities that might not be obvious to a species that evolved in different conditions than ours." For the first time since the alien armada appeared, Markov felt a glimmer of hope. Humanity had spent its entire history learning to survive under harsh conditions and against terrible odds. Perhaps being underestimated would prove to be their greatest advantage. Dr. Prisha Chandrasekhar hadn't slept in 30 hours. The engineering bay of the Stoneheart had transformed into an impromptu research lab, holographic projections of the alien vessels floating above every available surface. Coffee cups littered her workstation as she pored over the sensor data Captain Markov had sent down. "This can't be right," she muttered, running the analysis for the 4th time. The results remained unchanged. Her assistant, Ensign Rodriguez, looked up from his own terminal. "What did you find?" Chandrasekhar gestured at the structural model rotating before her. "These ships, they're marvels of engineering, certainly. Quantum-stabilized alloys, energy distribution systems we can barely comprehend. But look at the hull composition." Rodriguez studied the readout. "It's some kind of advanced metallic composite we've never seen before." "Yes, but notice the density pattern." Chandrasekhar highlighted sections of the model. "There's no variation, no reinforcement at critical junctures, no redundant shielding around vital systems." She pulled up a comparison model of the Stoneheart. "Look at our ship. Layered ablative armor plating, thickest around the bridge, engines, and weapon systems. Compartmentalized design so one breach doesn't compromise the entire vessel." Her fingers danced across the controls, bringing up new data streams. "And I've been analyzing their quantum communications. The translation matrix is still struggling with technical terms, but I'm picking up references to their homeworlds." The hologram shifted to display several planetary bodies, low-gravity environments, minimal tectonic activity, stable atmospheres with negligible radiation. Rodriguez's eyes widened as understanding dawned. They've never had to build ships to withstand extreme conditions. Exactly. Chandrasekhar pulled up Earth's geological and atmospheric data. Humans evolved on a death world by galactic standards. High gravity, constant radiation from our sun, regular tectonic activity, violent weather patterns, and a history of catastrophic extinction events. We built our ships to survive because our entire evolutionary history taught us that survival requires redundancy and resilience. Chandrasekhar's terminal chimed with an incoming transmission from UEF headquarters beneath the Antarctic ice shelf. Admiral Hassan Mahmoud's stern face appeared on screen, the command bunker visible behind him. "Dr. Chandrasekhar, please tell me you found something we can use," he said without preamble. Chandrasekhar straightened. Admiral, I believe I have. The Vraxian vessels are technologically superior to ours in almost every way. Faster, more powerful, more efficient. But they have a critical vulnerability we lack. Explain. Their ships aren't built to take punishment. They're designed for elegance and efficiency, not survival. Chandrasekhar transferred her findings to the Admiral's terminal. They've never faced an adversary that could seriously threaten them, so they've optimized for perfect defense over defense. No redundant systems, minimal structural reinforcement, centralized rather than distributed command networks. Admiral Mahmood studied the data, his expression shifting from grim to thoughtful. You're saying their ships are glass cannons. Precisely. They can hit harder than anything we've ever built, but they can't take a hit like we can. Chandrasekhar highlighted the energy distribution network of the alien flagship. Their power systems are centralized rather than compartmentalized. One significant breach could cascade through their entire grid. In the command bunker, Mahmood turned to his strategic team. The camera caught their hushed conversation before he returned his attention to Chandrasekhar. Doctor, what about their weapon systems? Our defense screens won't hold against whatever they're using. Chandrasekhar nodded grimly. They're using directed energy weapons we can't hope to match. Some kind of quantum disruption technology. But she pulled up a new simulation. Their targeting systems are calibrated for precision strikes against similar technology. They're not designed to handle multiple smaller targets or unconventional attack vectors. Mahmood's eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? Admiral, they expect us to fight like them, to try matching their technology and failing. But we should fight like humans. Dirty, improvisational, willing to take hits to deliver hits. Chandrasekhar's voice grew more confident. The Stoneheart and our other vessels have modular missile systems that can be reconfigured for different payloads. If we load them with kinetic penetrators instead of explosives, essentially turning them into railgun projectiles, their defense systems might not register them as weapons until impact. For the first time since the crisis began, Admiral Mahmood smiled. Dr. Chandrasekhar, I think you just gave humanity a fighting chance. He turned to his staff. Get me the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary General, and prepare all UEF vessels for combat configuration Delta 7. As the transmission ended, Chandrasekhar slumped back in her chair, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Ensign Rodriguez handed her a fresh cup of coffee. You really think we can win against that? He asked, nodding toward the hologram of the alien armada. Chandrasekhar stared at the elegant, beautiful, and fatally flawed vessels of the Vraxian hierarchy. They've never fought a species that evolved on a world that tries to kill them daily. They've never had to improvise or adapt under fire. She took a sip of coffee. They've never met humans before. The counteroffensive. The mood in the UEF Stoneheart briefing room was somber as Captain Markov addressed the assembled officers. A holographic countdown floated above the tactical table. 14:23:57, remaining until the Vraxian hierarchy's deadline expired. Admiral Mahmood has authorized Operation Thunderstrike, Markov announced, bringing up tactical displays of 7 vessels. The hierarchy expects us to either surrender or mount a conventional defense. We're doing neither. The display shifted to show 7 smaller ships, Phantom-class stealth corvettes, each barely a quarter the size of the Stoneheart. Originally designed for covert operations during the Titan insurrection, they represented the pinnacle of human stealth technology. The Whisper, Shade, Phantom, Umbra, Spectre, Wraith, and Nightfall will deploy immediately, Markov continued. Their mission is simple but crucial. Approach the hierarchy fleet undetected and deliver a first strike that will disrupt their battle formation. Lieutenant Commander Kozlov raised a hand. What kind of payload are they carrying? Our conventional warheads won't scratch those hulls. A grim smile crossed Markov's face. No warheads at all. Dr. Chandrasekhar's analysis suggests their defense systems are calibrated for energy weapons and explosive ordnance. She brought up a new schematic. Each corvette has been equipped with modified kinetic penetrators, essentially solid tungsten rods with minimal guidance systems and maximum mass. "The Poseidon's spear," murmured one of the officers, referencing the ancient naval tactic of ramming. "Precisely," Markov nodded. "Sometimes the oldest weapons are the most effective against new enemies. At impact velocities approaching 0.15 c, these penetrators will carry more energy than our largest nuclear weapons, and since they're primarily inert mass with minimal electronic signatures, the hierarchy ships might not even register them as weapons until it's too late." Aboard the stealth corvette Wraith, Captain Isamu Tanaka guided his vessel through the scattered debris of Neptune's ring system, using the ice and dust as additional camouflage against Phyraxian sensors. The ship's experimental ablative cooling system kept their heat signature nearly indistinguishable from the surrounding space. Approaching designated launch coordinates, his navigator reported quietly, though there was no need for whispers in the vacuum of space. Old habits from submarine service died hard. Tanaka checked his tactical display. The other 6 corvettes were similarly positioned, creating a rough heptagon around their target area. The hierarchy fleet maintained its perfect formation, their metallic vessels absorbing the distant sunlight rather than reflecting it. "Final weapon check," Tanaka ordered. His weapons officer ran through the diagnostics. "Kinetic penetrator is nominal. Mass ratio optimized at 97%. Guidance system on standby." Tanaka took a deep breath. Humanity's first offensive action against an alien species would happen on his command. The weight of history pressed on his shoulders like a physical force. "Remember," he told his crew, "we're not aiming to destroy their entire fleet. We just need to prove they're vulnerable, to break their sense of invulnerability for psychological impact as much as tactical advantage." The navigator looked up. "In position, Captain." Tanaka nodded. "All corvettes, this is Wraith. Commence simultaneous launch on my mark." He watched the countdown on his display. 3, 2, 1. Mark. 7 tungsten penetrators, each massing nearly 60 tons, detached from their carrier vessels. Initially moving at the same velocity as the corvettes, they activated minimal guidance systems and sequential acceleration charges. No propellant flares or energy signatures, just pure Newtonian physics as they gradually built speed toward their targets. In the Phyraxian flagship, Sovereign Commander Tazvor reviewed the incorporation protocols for Earth. The species showed promise despite their primitive technology. Adaptable, resilient, and with interesting cognitive patterns. They would make useful additions to the hierarchy once properly guided. "Sovereign Commander." His sensor officer's voice held an unusual note of concern. "We're detecting anomalous mass readings approaching from multiple vectors." Tazvor didn't bother looking up from his work. "Specify anomalous." 7 objects. Solid mass. Approaching at high velocity. They appear to be. Confusion colored the officer's tone. "Simple projectiles." Tazvor finally glanced at the tactical display, mandibles clicking in amusement. "The humans are throwing rocks at us. Activate perimeter defenses as a precaution, but maintain current alert status." The defense officer complied but frowned at his readouts. "The defense grid is having difficulty targeting. The objects have minimal electronic signatures and no energy emissions." For the first time, a flicker of concern passed through Tazvor's consciousness. "Velocity. Increasing rapidly. Currently at 0.12 c and accelerating." Tazvor's exoskeleton stiffened. At those speeds, even primitive projectiles would carry devastating kinetic energy. Evasive action. "All vessels disperse formation." The order came too late. The first tungsten penetrator struck the Phyraxian vessel Immutable Doctrine amidships. The metallic hull, designed to disperse energy weapons, had no defense against 60 tons of solid metal moving at a significant fraction of light speed. The penetrator punched through the vessel like a bullet through glass, the kinetic energy converting to heat and shock waves that shattered the ship from within. 3 more hierarchy ships suffered direct hits within seconds, while the remaining penetrators grazed their targets, still causing significant damage. The perfect formation dissolved into chaos as the surviving vessels scattered. Sovereign Commander Tazvor stared in disbelief at the tactical display, showing 4 of his ships destroyed and 3 heavily damaged. For the first time in his long career, he felt something foreign and disturbing enter his mind. Doubt. Tazvor's rage manifested as crackling energy across his exoskeleton. The Hierarchy Battle Network, previously a model of elegant coordination, now pulsed with chaotic data as damaged ships reported their status. Full counterattack, he commanded. Target their primary vessels and unleash maximum firepower. Show these primitives the consequence of defiance. The remaining hierarchy vessels realigned with unsettling swiftness. Their weapon ports opened like blossoming flowers, revealing cores of swirling energy that defied human understanding of physics. Aboard the Stoneheart, Captain Markov watched the tactical display with calculated calm. They're forming up for a concentrated barrage. All vessels execute Scatter Protocol Gamma. Maintain communications discipline. The human fleet, a patchwork collection of cruisers, destroyers, and frigates, broke formation in what appeared to be panicked disarray. But the seeming chaos concealed a deliberate strategy. Each vessel followed predetermined vectors designed by combat AIs to be unpredictable to alien targeting systems. Incoming. Lieutenant Kozlov shouted as the hierarchy weapons discharged. The void between Neptune and Uranus erupted with blinding energy. Streams of quantum disruption beams sliced through space, each capable of shearing the human vessel in half. The first wave caught the outer defensive screen of UEF ships. The destroyer Tenacious vanished in a silent explosion. The frigate Defiant lost its entire port section, but incredibly maintained power. 3 more ships disintegrated completely. Markov gripped the command rail as the Stoneheart executed a high-evasive maneuver that would have killed an unaugmented human crew. Damage report. Glancing hit to our starboard armor belt, reported the damage control officer. Sections 15 through 22 are compromised. Emergency bulkheads holding. Reactor containment stable. Markov studied the battle display. The hierarchy's opening salvo had destroyed 5 ships and damaged 7 more, a devastating blow by any military standard. Yet the human fleet had absorbed the punch and remained combat effective. All vessels execute attack pattern Omega-4, she ordered. Weapons free. Prioritize targets according to Protocol 7. The human counterattack lacked the spectacular visual impact of the hierarchy's energy barrage. Instead, hundreds of missiles erupted from launch tubes, their conventional drives quickly giving way to more advanced propulsion systems once clear of their motherships. Alongside them, railgun batteries accelerated tungsten slugs to appreciable fractions of light speed. Aboard the hierarchy flagship, the defensive systems officer reported with increasing alarm. Sovereign Commander, their attack methodology is confusing. Multiple weapon types with varying signatures. Defense grid struggling to prioritize threats. Tazvor watched as his elegant defenses, designed to counter the coherent energy weapons used by all civilized species, attempted to track thousands of individual projectiles with wildly different properties. Some moved at near-relativistic velocities. Others accelerated then decelerated unpredictably. Still others split into multiple submunitions. This is barbaric warfare, he hissed. No coherent doctrine. No recognizable patterns. 3 more hierarchy vessels succumbed to the human barrage. Their perfect metallic hulls, while impervious to energy weapons through quantum resonance defenses, shattered under the assault of kinetic impacts and distributed explosive force. The battle expanded across the orbital plane. Human ships, despite taking horrific damage, refused to die. The cruiser Indefatigable, its entire command section vaporized, continued fighting with its auxiliary control center. The destroyer Resilient, split nearly in half by a hierarchy beam, used emergency force fields to maintain atmospheric integrity, while its weapon systems continued firing. Markov felt the Stoneheart shudder as another energy beam grazed the reinforced keel. Target the lead vessel with plasma lances. All remaining kinetic batteries focus on their flagship's port section. Their sensor cluster appears more concentrated there. The Stoneheart's experimental plasma lances, humanity's best approximation of the hierarchy's energy weapons, discharged with a power drain that dimmed lights across the ship. The targeted alien vessel's defenses easily dispersed the energy attack, but the plasma lance served its purpose as distraction. While the alien ship's defenses focused on the energy threat, 20 railgun projectiles struck its port section in rapid succession. The cumulative kinetic force overwhelmed the metallic lattice structure, sending fractures propagating throughout the hull. "They're adapting," Kozlov warned. "Their defense grid is reconfiguring to better track kinetic projectiles." Markov nodded grimly. As expected, Weapons Officer switched to tertiary attack profile. Deploy the chaff clouds and black wake countermeasures. As the human fleet executed its tactical shift, Markov studied the hierarchy flagship. Despite the damage they'd inflicted, the aliens still held overwhelming technological superiority. This wasn't a battle humans could win conventionally, but winning wasn't the objective. The battle plan called for something far more human, making victory so costly that the enemy would question whether it was worth the price. The Stoneheart rocked under another hit, more severe this time. Emergency sirens wailed across the ship as entire sections were exposed to vacuum. "Auxiliary power to sections 30 through 38, Markov ordered as she studied the damage reports. "Reroute command functions through the tertiary network." On the tactical display, she watched as the human fleet continued its chaotic, unpredictable assault. 5 more UEF vessels had been destroyed, but they claimed 3 more hierarchy ships in exchange. More importantly, the perfect synchronization of the alien fleet was breaking down, their responses becoming fragmented as individual ship commanders tried to adapt to the human tactics. "Captain," Lieutenant Wei called from the communication station, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Mahmoud. Phase 2 authorization confirmed." A fierce smile crossed Markov's face. "Acknowledged. All vessels. This is UEF Stoneheart. Commence Operation Swarm. I repeat, commence Operation Swarm." Across the human fleet, cargo bay doors opened to release thousands of small objects, each barely larger than a fighter craft. The drones, powered by miniaturized fusion reactors, accelerated toward the hierarchy fleet. Aboard the Vraxian flagship, Tazvor watched with growing alarm as his tactical display filled with new contacts. "What are these?" "Analysis indicates autonomous drone weapons," his tactical officer reported. "Primitive AI guidance, minimal armament. They pose no significant threat individually." Tazvor studied the swarm patterns as the drones approached. "Their numbers are concerning. Increase point defense coverage. Target the largest concentrations first." The hierarchy fleet's defense systems reoriented to engage the drone swarm, their energy weapons slicing through dozens of the small craft with each shot. But for every drone destroyed, 3 more altered course to fill the gap, their movements unpredictable and seemingly chaotic. "Sovereign Commander," the defensive systems officer reported, "the drones are not attacking. They're positioning themselves around our vessels." Tazvor's mandibles clicked in confusion as he watched the strange behavior. The drones weren't firing weapons or attempting to ram his ships. Instead, they were forming a loose cloud around each hierarchy vessel. "What is their purpose?" he demanded. His answer came as the drones simultaneously activated their primary systems, not weapons, but powerful electromagnetic field generators. Individually insignificant, their combined effect created a localized disruption field that interfered with the hierarchy's quantum communications network. For the first time in the hierarchy's long history of conquest, their perfect battle coordination fragmented. Ship commanders, cut off from the centralized command network, were forced to make individual tactical decisions, something they had never trained for. In the momentary confusion, the human fleet struck again, this time targeting specific vulnerabilities that Dr. Chandrasekhar had identified. The Stoneheart led the assault, its remaining weapons concentrated on the hierarchy flagship's now exposed command section. The battle had become a chaotic melee, exactly the environment where human adaptability and individual initiative thrived, and where the hierarchy's rigid hierarchy faltered. Paradigm shift. Sovereign Commander Tazvor gripped the edge of his command console as his flagship shuddered under another barrage. Warning indicators flashed across every display as systems failed and automatic repair protocols were overwhelmed. The elegant battle network that had coordinated 23 perfect vessels was now fragmented, with only 11 ships remaining, and those in various states of damage. How? He demanded of no one in particular. How can primitive vessels inflict such damage? His sensor officer looked up from a console sparking with damaged circuits. The humans are fighting irrationally. Sovereign Commander. They're sacrificing vessels to create tactical advantages. They're accepting critical damage to deliver attacks. Tazvor struggled to comprehend. In 15,000 cycles of hierarchy expansion, no species had ever displayed such behavior. Rational beings preserved their technological assets. They fought with precision and withdrew when defeat was mathematically certain. These humans were doing neither. All vessels, he commanded, trying to reassert control over his scattered fleet, disengage and regroup at the designated coordinates. We must reestablish the battle network. Only 8 vessels acknowledged the command. The others were either destroyed or cut off by the human drone swarm that continued to disrupt communications. Tazvor felt something unfamiliar, a sensation the Vraxian species had engineered out of their psychology cycles ago. Fear. Aboard the UEF Stoneheart, Captain Markov surveyed what remained of her command. The bridge was operating on emergency power, with exposed circuitry and emergency force fields containing atmosphere in 3 sections. Nearly 40% of the crew was dead or injured, and the ship's primary weapons were depleted or offline. Yet on the tactical display, she could see the hierarchy fleet in disarray, their perfect formation shattered as surviving vessels attempted to regroup. They're retreating to Neptune's shadow, Kozlov reported, blood crusting on the side of his face from a console explosion, attempting to re-establish their command network beyond the drone interference. Markov nodded, wincing as the movement aggravated her broken ribs. Just as Admiral Memwood predicted. Status of Operation Eclipse. Lieutenant Wei looked up from her damaged console. UEF Shadowfold reports ready position. Awaiting your command. Markov took a painful breath. Transmit authentication code Alpha 7 Omega. Tell them to proceed. As the Vraxian vessels regrouped in Neptune's shadow, they failed to detect the silent presence already waiting for them. The UEF Shadowfall, humanity's most advanced stealth vessel, had positioned itself days earlier as part of the contingency plan. Unlike the Phantom-class corvettes used in the initial strike, the Shadowfall was a dedicated carrier. Inside its massive hangar bay, 500 specialized drones awaited deployment, each containing not weapons, but the most unconventional payload humanity could devise: human operators. When the hierarchy vessels arrived at their rallying point, the Shadowfall released its swarm. Each drone, piloted by a human with neural interface training, made for a specific target on the damaged Vraxian ships, not to destroy, but to board. The drones attached to hull breaches, emergency access ports, and damaged sections. Cutting through the alien material, specially trained boarding teams entered the Vraxian vessels armed with adaptive hacking devices and Chandrasekhar's analysis of Vraxian systems. Aboard the hierarchy flagship, Tazvor was attempting to re-establish fleet coordination when the ship's internal sensors triggered alerts. Security breach in multiple sections, his internal defense officer reported with growing panic. Unknown entities have penetrated the hull. Impossible, Tazvor snapped. No species would risk their biological forms in boarding actions. Deploy security drones. But the security drones found themselves outmatched by an enemy they weren't designed to confront: human ingenuity. The boarding teams had studied Vraxian technology long enough to identify vulnerabilities. Using electromagnetic disruptors calibrated to the specific frequency of Vraxian security systems, they systematically disabled internal defenses and made their way toward critical ship functions. On the Stoneheart, Markov received the encrypted transmissions from the boarding teams. Phase 3 is proceeding. Teams have penetrated 7 vessels, including the flagship. Estimated time to objective: 15 minutes. She turned to her executive officer. Order the fleet to maintain distance, but keep weapons locked. I want the Vraxians to know we can finish this if necessary, but give our teams the time they need. The human fleet, or what remained of it, formed a loose perimeter around the regrouping hierarchy vessels. Though battered and bleeding, humanity's ships projected a clear message. Retreat was not an option. Aboard the Vraxian flagship, Tazvor was receiving increasingly desperate reports from throughout his vessel. The humans have taken control of auxiliary power systems. Engineering reports critical systems compromised. Weapon control is locked out. The sovereign commander couldn't process what was happening. No species in recorded history had ever boarded a hierarchy vessel. The concept was so alien that their ships had minimal internal defenses. Why would any rational being expose their biological forms to such risk when remote weapons were available? His tactical display showed similar reports from the other vessels. Within 20 minutes, the entire remaining hierarchy fleet had been compromised from within. Tazvor's console chimed with an incoming communication. To his shock, it originated from his own command center. The screen activated to show a human face, a female with dark skin and determined eyes wearing some kind of environmental suit. Sovereign Commander Tazvor, I am Major Amara Okafor of the United Earth Federation Special Operations Division. Your vessel is now under our control. Your weapons, propulsion, and life support systems are operated by my teams. The same is true for your remaining fleet vessels. Tazvor's mandibles clicked in agitation. This is unprecedented. No species has ever refused incorporation. Major Okafor interrupted. I find that hard to believe. But perhaps no species has ever been so accustomed to fighting for survival. She leaned closer to the camera. Humanity evolved on what you would consider a death world, Commander. Our entire history is defined by overcoming impossible odds. We have survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, plagues, and our own destructive tendencies. We don't expect to win. We simply refuse to lose. For several moments, Tazvor was silent, processing this fundamental paradigm shift. The hierarchy's entire expansion strategy was based on the rational calculation of inferior species. They had never encountered a species that would accept devastating losses to achieve victory. A concept so foreign to Vraxian psychology that their strategic doctrines had no contingency for it. What do you propose? He finally asked. You will transmit to your leadership that Earth and the Sol system are to be classified as prohibited territory. Okafor replied. In exchange, we will return your vessels and crews. We'll even provide your engineers with our analysis of the structural vulnerabilities in your ship designs as a gesture of potential future cooperation. Tazvor's compound eyes studied the human carefully. You would share technical knowledge with us after we attempted to incorporate your world. Major Okafor's expression remained neutral. Humanity understands the value of turning enemies into allies, Commander. History has taught us that lasting peace comes not from domination but mutual respect. We don't want to destroy the Vraxian hierarchy. We want to trade with it, learn from it, and perhaps teach it something in return. In the command center of the UEF Stoneheart, Captain Markov watched the exchange on her view screen. Beside her stood Admiral Mehmud, who had transferred his flag to the Stoneheart after the destruction of his own vessel early in